a quick reminder of what the idea was behind these films. These films, they all had the brief of relationships. They had to be short films, which they were. And they are what we call emerging filmmakers, writers and directors. I don't know whether they feel they've emerged yet, but they are emerging in this particular case. These are, we have 1 documentary and 4 dramas, and they explore the themes, as you've seen, migration, indigenous rights, barrel children, in other words, the children of economic migrants, and very boldly, same-sex relationships in Kenya. But these are, the whole idea is that these are local stories with a universal appeal that may sound very grand and a bit pompous, but in fact, what you'll hear from all of them is they all originate from, very personal stories often, but also they're genuinely local stories. And I feel that, when we sit here watching Oscar ceremonies and BAFTAs and so on, and we sort of get a bit caught up with the glitz and the glamour and George Clooney, well, that I do, generally, and we tend to forget that there's a whole other world of filmmaking out there and of stories, and that we're not hearing them. And I personally feel very, very strongly about that, and that's why I'm sort of proud and delighted to be involved with this project and with other Commonwealth Writers projects. Now, there's an urgency to these films, which you probably saw, and I think that before I sort of talk too much, I'm going to ask them, as well, first of all, how they felt, how they managed to keep to this brief, which is, it has to be about relationships, it has to be about a local story, and it has to be reasonably personal with a universal theme. Now, that's not that's not too difficult, is it, Lisa? I mean, how did you get on with that brief? Was it difficult? Now, you've got mics here, or you can use the handheld, but I think if you just bring these mics a little bit closer, and then you can all just totally unabashed talk yourselves.
Oh no, I have to go first.
Yeah, I'm anointing you.
I think for me, this is a story that I've been working on for a long time, for a feature. So
the idea.
The idea.
So when Commonwealth Writers came along and said, "How about it?"
It just kind of it slotted in completely. I kind of just decided to write it from the point of view of the adult as opposed to the child. Okay. Yeah, but that idea of doing something on relationships and on love, I think most people would immediately default to romantic love, maybe. And, migration is such a huge factor in the Caribbean. And we never talk about anything other than maybe the value of remittances or brain drain, but we don't talk about how it affects family structure and how all the different ways that we've come up with to cope with this kind of binational life that a lot of people in the Caribbean have to live. So for me, it just fell into place perfectly.
Lisa's story was from Barbados and was about it was Auntie, the film Auntie. We'll talk more about the films as we go along, but Wanjiru, next to Lisa, this was, I've got to say, this is a very brave film to make. I know what's going on, and I'm sure everybody else here does in Kenya and many other countries in Africa, how difficult a subject it was. Now, you took a father of a family who was wanted to come out as homosexual, as gay. Gosh, how did you come to take this brave decision to make this film? Speaking to the mic there.
Well, it started with working in television, where we had. I work in TV back home, and we had people coming in. I'm really nervous, guys, so please. So I work in TV back home, and where I work, for the production company that I work for, we were getting funding to talk about gay issues. So we created a TV show based around a character that came into a village, and he was gay, but he did come out of the closet, but he eventually was accepted by the community. Now, when the show premiered on TV, that particular episode was taken out of context, out of the show, because the broadcasting TV station just didn't feel like it was something that they wanted to portray Yeah, so back home, there's a lot of...
Have there been other films and TV series about this?
Definitely not.
So this was a first?
This is a first, and we'll see how the response is back home. Other than the screening that I had in September, which was
that was in Nairobi?
In Nairobi. I would like to take it within other countries and also regions within Kenya, and just like deeper into the villages and see how they would get this conversation started.
So this is definitely a local story to Kenya, which you feel can have sort of a much broader appeal.
Yeah.
Fits the brief. Very good. Now, Jules Koostachin, next to you. Jules, you're making the only documentary. You're bang in the middle of that film. Yeah. You are the protagonist. Again, brave to film yourself, your family, to expose yourself in that way. But this is something I know that you feel very, very strongly about. This whole idea of the journey and the traditions and the beliefs of your First Nation people. So tell us how you came to make this particular film about the placenta, which wouldn't have been my first choice. But
if you notice the title of placenta, you actually see that I play on words, on the word place, because a lot of Indigenous people worldwide have been severed from their Indigenous practices, their cultural practices. So for me, this film was very important and personal. I guess the main reason why I made the film was because I was tired of seeing my placenta in my freezer. But hence, it's still there. Yeah. And the more I travel, the more I'm hearing similar stories. So I know there's some closet cases out there that may have their placentas.
So we're talking about
yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, it's an important story that needs to be told. And placenta, I mean, everyone in this room had one. It's an organ made for you. So I think we have to get over that stigma of actually even saying the word.
Now, you may think I'm sort of making light of this, but not at all. I mean, what I like so much is that there is humour in your film. And your kids are absolutely wonderful. I mean, they're like, a kind of very natural reaction to something which they don't know an awful lot about.
Yeah, and they actually talk about it all the time. They're in their classroom, and they're like, the reason Tapwewan is smaller than me, and this is Powhatan, is because Powhatan ate most of the placenta. So they're actually very, very comfortable.
Right,
so.
Well, we need to have a bit more conversation like that in English schools, I think. Now, next door, we've got Kareem Mortimer. Now, Kareem, you've made quite a few films before this, and your film, The Passage, which is, again, it's quite a difficult topic, and you take us right in there. There's a bit of pink vomiting right at the beginning. Yes. It's quite hard to watch this film, and it feels very real. And I know you put yourself into a very real situation to make it. So tell us about the actual making of this film.
Oh yeah, so I'm from the Bahamas. We shot over 3 days in the bottom of a boat. I don't speak Creole, so I wrote the script in English, and we had it translated. Most of the extras in the film are from the Haitian community in the Bahamas. And they were very, nobody ever complained about how hot it was. Nobody ever complained about how little consideration was giving for like funds.
You
or
paid them loads of money.
Yeah, or the quality of the craft service, because they felt like for the first time they had an opportunity to portray something that they or some members of their family experience, and so that was just really made everything much more pleasant in making the film, because nobody ever really complained about anything, even though we may have felt it. Yeah.
No, I mean, you can just tell there was some real, it seemed very, very hot and very difficult. And you had a lot of close-up shots as well, too.
Yes.
I mean, you obviously wanted to focus in on the faces and the reactions all the time.
Because some of the faces are really like works of art, and really they say so much, and it's such an intimate thing to be in a boat with people you don't know, and you're so tight, and so that's probably part of the aesthetic of choosing those tight shots.
And this is a real situation of economic migrants, traveling. Yeah. This is a real present day situation.
Yes, it happens on a ship called a live or die ship, and the thing about being on a live or die ship is that communicable diseases are a real threat. So when you so if you get dysentery, the decision is to save the whole. You have to sacrifice the one, and so you would, obviously throw someone overboard so that everybody else will survive. So it's not always such a mean thing, but it's something that's just a reality in that given that situation.
Oscar Kightley at the end. Oscar, you're Samoan, but you live in New Zealand, and you chose to set your short film in the past, in 1981. Why did you choose to set this particular topic of?
Just got lots of issues from childhood, and
You can tell us.
until you deal with those ones from the childhood, just can't really move on in life. Nah, I don't know.
You're stuck in 1981 then.
I guess, someone said if you survive your childhood, you got stuff to write about for the rest of your life. I don't know, I guess when I was given this opportunity to make this film, I was just thinking, I just thought of a lot of elements from my childhood that I kind of wanted to put together. I wanted to see on a big screen, like stealing milk money, how the arcade game was the centre of the universe, the kind of alliance between these hood kids, stressed out mother of a big family giving her boy a hiding for being too shamed, this kid having a crush on the Chinese, on Mr. Lee's daughter, and I just kind of threw it all together. And also 1981 was the year Bob Marley died, and I remember that being quite a major event. I don't know why. Because we loved him. In fact, that mural is still on the wall a year later, and no one's tagged it.
Did you paint the mural for the film?
The guy who played the artist, he painted it, and the dairy owner let us leave it up there, and it's become like a shrine to Bob Marley in West Auckland. It's awesome.
Now, Oscar, this is your first film, short feature film that you've made. Now, you're in New Zealand. You're well known as a comedian. And
Yes, Rosie, that's right.
But you've gone into this new area now, into filmmaking. How did you take to it? Do you like it? Do you want to sort of give up being front of screen now? You want to be behind, or?
Yeah, absolutely, because, you get too old for the front of the screen. It's a game for kids these days. But also being able to control everything. And also you get, whenever there's a chance for a festival, it's the director who gets flown. So that's another bonus if you've got that name.
Oscar goes to Oscar.
Yeah, the director gets all the cool trips. I mean, look, here I am in London.
There you are. Now, the point about all this too is that 3 of the countries you're representing, that you don't actually have what we call a film industry. There is no infrastructure for making films. Now, Lisa, this is unimaginable. I mean, how did you get round the fact that you have no film industry in Barbados as such? You have bits of, and you've been involved in production and marketing and so on, so you know a bit of the world, but of this particular world. But how did you get around that?
I mean, we have a video production industry, but in terms of making films, there's no co-production agreements, there's no production insurance, there's no... I mean, I think I easily have the smallest crew on my film of all the films here. When you watch the credits, my crew is like 7 people, and Oscar had like 112 or something like that. Everybody on my crew doubled up. So when I wasn't directing, I was shooting stills and combing hair and putting up those postcards. Every time she took them down and we had to do another take, I was putting them back up in place. The producer was, making tea and running for the food, and the key grip and the gaffer were both doing gaffing and sound and grip, and everybody just was multitasking. We had to go to an insurance company and say, okay, we need this kind of coverage. So they kind of stitched together 3 different types of policies, but they had no idea what we were doing. They were baffled by the idea that we were making a film and insuring the production. Even the bank was baffled. They were like, what?
So you've got a few interesting credits up there. I think there was a lumber company as well.
Yes,
too. Yeah,
because we needed to build the backyard, and we painted a house, and I painted the house with the producer. We went in 2 days before and we painted the house.
And the colours of the paint is absolutely beautiful, actually. It's a beautifully saturated film.
Yeah, it's a great little village that we found. We just drove around until we found a house and said, who owns this house? And we went to the woman and said, we want to make a film. And she looked at us, she went, is it a porno? Like people have this whole thing of like location management, like none of that exists. You're literally, when you say that to somebody, they look at you really baffled. Like, what do you mean you want to make a movie inside my house? What kind of movie do you want to make inside my house? Constant improvisation with everything, all the time.
Kareem, you also don't have a film industry as such in the Bahamas, so how do you get around that? I mean, is it changing at all?
I don't know. I think every time it's really hard. Like what there's no infrastructure to get narrative films to produce narrative films on a regular basis. I mean, I think a lot of people do like documentaries of historical figures, but I think there's been like really just two narrative feature films that have emerged in the last maybe 6 years, and those Children of God and Rain by Maria Govan. And Children of God I did before.
And that was a hugely successful film too. Kareem's won several awards for his film.
Oh, thank you. It's like
Yeah,
that's so embarrassing.
the Oscars
And so there's no infrastructure. It's similar to what Lisa's. The experience is very similar, where you have to, like, you're at the forefront of pushing the boundaries to get people to accept that, hey, this is something you can make a living out of, and also this is something that's very important, and this is something for us to see ourselves reflected if we ever intend to move forward as a people, because it's really important. And it's also, film is really great because, like, even with the short film and the way we get to travel with it and get to introduce, some things about our country to people who may never have given the Bahamas a second thought, as opposed to a place where you can have like a rum drink on a beach, and so it's trying to get that message out there, and hopefully like things like this continue for countries that we don't hear a lot of stories from.
You're all together here for the first London screening of these films together, and you've all seen each other's films. Do you think there is a common story? I mean, is there something that you're all trying to say? Wanjiru, how do you feel about seeing all these films together? Do you feel something in common with the others?
I don't know, are we all expressing some sort of pain?
It's very painful, yeah.
Wait, I mean, anything at all that you feel that you've shared with, I mean, you've all met a few times, you've chatted about your films and so on. Anything that you feel that you share with the others?
I love for film.
Jules, what do you feel about that?
It's interesting to me that we all come from different places and that we have a commonality, and that's our human experience, and we all deal with barriers and stuff within our own countries, and we have our own histories or herstories. So for me, just meeting all of these guys here, guys, we, it's almost like we know each other already. So it really speaks to the importance of sharing our stories and the diversity of those stories.
And for you, it's the if you like, the common human experience of these. I mean, Oscar, what do you feel about this? Is there a common story for you in all these films you've been to?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been to any of these countries, but it was amazing. I resonated with all of them, and for me there was this kind of weird theme of displacement running through it, even if you were kind of in a seeming place that looks like paradise. Also, Jules being in Toronto, is that how you say it?
Toronto.
But yeah, I mean, it's weird. I mean, I can't put my finger on it, but I've got something from each of them, and the more I see them, the more I love them. I don't know. What do you guys think? Did you think there was a universality in there? Anyone? Yes, you, miss.
I mean, you could argue. I mean, what could a story about a Samoan boy in West Auckland in New Zealand say to somebody from Barbados? Is there should we be sharing these stories?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like that point you made about seeing films from these 5 different places, the fact that you can kind of sit there quietly and watch them all, I think the more you see these diverse stories from different places, the more you realise how, despite the borders, it sounds very worthy and like on Bono, but despite the borders, it just shows we're all kind of the same. really. It doesn't matter where you come from, and the more different the stories, the more specific they are to their culture, it's like the more you connect with it. So I think in terms of universality, you don't have to reach everyone, or the best way to reach everyone is to tell your own story, and then that gives people a way in, I think.
Wanjiru, this is what you were referring to right at the beginning as well, too, that you've got a story here which obviously everybody can understand in some way and is troubled by, or angry about, or moved by. I mean, do you feel, is it the story for you that you want to tell? Is this the main reason for your film?
For me, it's just to get a conversation started on gay. There's a lot of anti-homo. There's a lot of, obviously, as you all know, I'm guessing, you read the newspaper, it's like...
Speaking to the mic, yeah.
Is that too far?
Yeah, it's up, yeah.
So, yeah, now you threw me off, but I'll get there. So, what was the question again? I'm really messed.
This is this idea of, finding a story local to you, that you feel strongly about, that we should all know about. I mean, do you think that, obviously you felt strongly enough to say, I don't care what the obstacles are, I don't care how controversial it is, I'm determined to get this story out. And that's what made you do it.
Yes, because there's people that are dying back home, and I don't think that's when the rest of the world has figured out, okay, it's not cool to kill people because of their sexual orientation, and we actually have bigger issues that we need to be sorting out, like insecurity or poverty back home. Let's focus on a minority and target them as I don't know, the scum of the world. Or so yeah, I feel that people need to be discussing these issues, because if we're not talking, then we're definitely fighting amongst ourselves.
Now, you all come from very beautiful countries, beautiful parts of the world, and in fact, these, to look at the surface of these, Barbados, Bahamas, the kinds of places, if we could afford to, we'd go to on holiday. Canada, I know Canada very well, absolutely extraordinary and gorgeous places. But these are the stories that you don't see and don't often hear about, and that seems to me what you all have in common, is that you are telling something, beneath the surface, really. I mean, Jules, you in Canada, are these stories discussed in Canada? Is this story, a common story for Canada?
I think the residential school experience, the residential school system, the Indian Act, we're the only country with an Indian Act. I think people...
What is an Indian Act? What is an Indian Act?
Oh my gosh, when we talk about 500 years of... No, I'm just kidding. An Indian Act is basically the act that governs every day of our lives. So I have a status card, so I'm registered with the government as a status Indian. So only, I think... I don't even know when the Indian Act was actually started or commenced, but basically, just to give you an example, there's a part of the Indian Act, I think it's about 80 years old, which was just recently amended, where if you're on reserve, if 7 or more Indians want to leave the reserve, they have to ask permission from an Indian agent. So we're almost like wards of the state. Although our treaties are with your queen, we're a sovereign nation, and only till 1972 we became Canadian citizens. So the history of Canada, got to do some research, because there's a lot there. So those stories are just starting to surface now, because more Indigenous people are going to university. They're 200%, so they have their Indigenous knowledge system that they're keeping intact and then learning the white way. So we're actually talking about these issues. We have lawyers, we have doctors, we have people working within the community that are actually spreading the word more.
Do you see yourself more as a social activist or as a filmmaker? I mean, what comes first for you, or do you find that the two go very well together?
I think I'm just speaking about what I know. This is my experience, right? I'm the daughter of a survivor. My grandparents are very traditional people who lived off the land. So I'm just speaking to what I know. I don't know any other reality. This is how I was raised. I was raised by someone who had a traumatic experience, who was taken at the age of 5, put in an institution miles and miles away from her home, and then returned at age 16. And when she returned after that many years of education, she came back with a grade 4 level. So what does that tell you about those institutions, right? So I'm only speaking to what I know.
Lisa, how difficult is it to make a film with a social message? Because you've got so many things going on with the film. You've got, obviously, there's a quality of the film. You've got, you know, the acting, the directing, the writing, and then you've got a social message. Obviously, you've got to handle it quite carefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything has to be story first.
Story first.
Story first. You don't want people to feel like they're being lectured to or educated. You want people to get lost in the story. And I come from a development support communication background anyway. So for me, it's just a matter of kind of making it more, finessing it a little bit more, and taking the message and making it even more sort of intrinsic to the script, rather than having these things that you that are more like PSAs, right?
PSA?
Public service announcements.
Just in case. I didn't grow up with them.
Yeah, for me, story first. Once people are engaged and you know, we had a couple of screenings at home, small screenings, and people came up to me afterwards and were giving me their testimonies, right? This woman came up to me and said she left her daughter at the age of 8 and never saw her again until she was 17, and she calls her daughter's caregiver her stepmother, but she's just a random person in the community. And she was sort of talking about the fact that her daughter, who's now in her 20s, is far closer to her stepmother than she is to her. And that she's accepted that they can only be friends, that they can't be mother and daughter. And she was really grateful that somebody had addressed that story in a film, and that conversation was happening. And,
Why do you think film is particularly good for this?
It can't be the image, you know. I don't think you can beat the image for, you know, drawing people into somebody else's world. And as Caribbean people, we're often quite reticent to talk about our own experiences. So having it sort of reflected and refracted, and somebody like kind of making composite characters as opposed to trying to get you to speak directly, you can kind of comment on what you see, and then I can draw you into telling me about yourself. Film is really, I think, unparalleled in that way as a form.
Now, Kareem, your film is full of very arresting images, and that image of the dead body, you know, right at the beginning of the film, and then various, you know, very strong things which have stayed with me, in fact, since I saw the film the first time in September. You are a very powerful filmmaker. Do you find that the, you know, having a social message is in conflict at all with making films?
It is and it isn't. I mean, like Lisa said, you have to approach the story first, and you have to make sure that they have to work hand in hand. But I never imagined myself as a social activist. I don't identify, even though like the work that I've made has been used in that context. It's just things that are personal to me, and like the personal becomes political in a way, right? And to be contrite, so that's the way that I approach it. And so in the development process with B3, I mean, you know, what was important is like, why do you want to make this story? And why do I want to make the story? It's not because that this happens to people and this is really terrible and people should stop. Why I made the story was that I had an image from childhood that I saw a body on the beach that really affected me. And so in the exploration of that image and making up a backstory to go with that becomes a political statement in the way that it can be received. And so, yeah.
Wanjiru, when you were making your film, were there any difficulties in the actual filmmaking? I mean, when you discuss the subject with your actors and, you know, everybody else on the production, did anybody have any reservations about participating in the film?
It began from auditions, really. There was people that came in and auditioned for the part, but then I guess they got cold feet thinking that my image would be portraying something that is against my religion or is an African taboo, and therefore they would pull out of the film. So then you had to recast again. And
so the actors did pull out.
Yeah.
After you cast them.
I had like 2 people pull out first.
2 main characters?
The person that was playing the main lead, I had to recast 2 times. So.
Because they didn't want to participate in a film about homosexuality.
Yeah. So then it's kind of difficult, because then you're like, okay, you're an actor, you're meant to be professional, you're meant to be about narrating, being truthful to a character that you play, the role that you're playing, but then again, they're like, yo, this is not in my community, not in Kenya, they would distance themselves from the movie. Obviously.
I mean, Jules, the way you handle this, and it's very easy to be, these are themes, childbirth and migration and homosexuality and so on. These are very worthy themes, potentially. Well, they are worthy themes, and it could be off-putting to some people if you explain it in those terms. But how did you get around that? I mean, did you intend to go in with a bit of humour and with your kids? And because they're very natural, they sort of lighten up the whole, short.
I think that's just how we are.
Very naturally.
I have 4 sons, so I don't know. Here, I feel like I live in a sorority house. Not a sorority house, but it's a fraternity house. So it feels like every day I'm the only woman in the house. So that's kind of how we are, anyways. So I'd like to shock my kids. I want them to be good men. I want them to be respectful of women. I traditionally come from a matriarchal society. For me, men have to know these teachings. My grandfather got all his women's teachings before puberty. My grandmother got all her men's teachings before puberty. And then they have a choice. So for me, that's how I was raised, that, we have to talk about these things. Like, it's your body, it's your sexuality. Like it's there to talk about. I don't know, it's very normal for me. So I guess, sometimes I do see the reactions on people's faces, and then I'm kind of like, what's wrong? I have to engage in that discussion because I don't see it as an issue.
Oscar, how do you, with your film, I mean, with all these films, how do you remain true to your local community, if you like, and nevertheless try to tell these universal messages? Because, in the end, you could just keep these films and show them to a few, people at home. But in fact, these are going out. They're going to go online. They're launched online now. They're being screened here in public and in big cities. And this is, how do you remain true to your local community in this sort of big equation here that we're putting up, this big show that we're putting on?
I guess it's that thing you just put in the question, you just stay true,
What do you mean by that?
You just be authentic you just be honest, I guess. And, people can tell when something's fake, and especially your own people, your own community. So I think that's how you make it universal. You don't try and think, now how will an audience in Bristol react to this? Or what will a group of people from all over the Commonwealth in London react to this? You can't think about those things. You got to think, what was my mum like? What was my brother and his friends like when they were making tinnies of weed in the garage? But I think that's, you just do that, you stay true. And that way, if anybody criticizes it or doesn't get it, it doesn't matter. Because, it is what it is, and the audience reacts the way they do, but as long as you're true to something.
Lisa, do you feel like a pioneer? Do you feel that you're doing something that nobody's done before?
I feel like a poor person. I don't know about being pioneering.
Poor in what way?
Financially. I'm not the only filmmaker in Barbados. I produced a feature before 3 years ago for about £15,000, if you can imagine that. And in the last 10 years or so, I think there's been a groundswell of activity around filmmaking in Barbados. But again, it's like the Wild West. Every time you start a production, you're kind of making it up from scratch. There's nothing that you can take from the last one into the next one because there's no support system, which is coming. Do I feel like a pioneer? I'm just doing what I'm doing, you know what I mean? I think it's important, as Oscar said, to be authentic. And I think this is actually where not having the resources and not having any rules actually helps us, because I don't think there's any value in trying to make a cheap version of Hollywood film. It would just be terrible, right? We don't have the resources, we don't have the money. And so,
Angelina Jolie's auntie would just be a bit too expensive.
Prosthetics might.
She'd want to adopt all the actors after.
Yeah, but I think this is where the financial constraints actually work in our favor. because we are forced to kind of tell smaller stories, be more intimate and focus on character. And what's going to kind of be unique for the audience is our culture, is our experience, and not necessarily like, you know, we're not wowing them with the technical stuff, you know what I mean?
Great. Well, look, I'm sure there are some questions in the audience. We've got a few minutes for questions. So please, anybody ask anything.
Anything.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, sorry. First of all, I wanted to congratulate each of you because the stories are very different but very interesting, and it's really a different like portrait of aspects of countries that we might know only by school memories or by tourism. So yes, that's the first thing, and that's a question for Kareem. And I wanted to know how did you do the casting of the people in the film?
Oh yeah, so I'm.
The Asian community.
Yeah, I just went to. So I did two things. I actually had a proper casting session, which I don't enjoy. If you're doing the casting, like it's not fun as a director, and it wasn't working. So I cast the actors and the main actors, but then I actually went into the community, and I just knocked on doors, and I met a Haitian filmmaker, a Haitian Bahamian, whatever that means. People say that, but a Haitian Bahamian filmmaker who like really embraced what I was doing, and he took me. We actually went into community, and he introduced me to his friends, and they were pretty much non-actors, yeah, in the film. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you, and wow, it seems a long way since we were looking at all the submissions for this. I'm Sally Ann Wilson, and I'm Secretary General of the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association and a Project Director of Worldview.
Thanks for the funding.
You've really all lived up to it. I think we're the largest association of public broadcasters, and what public broadcasters in the Commonwealth and beyond don't do is, as one of you said, let people see themselves. We see a lot of money come from foundations and funders into our projects and our work, which is about funding to make films about climate change, about HIV, about messaging. What we've lost is that everybody in the Commonwealth, every single one of us, has a tradition behind us of strong storytelling. And that's what cuts through with your films. And we want to carry on showcasing these films to broadcasters in Barbados, in Kenya, in Canada, so that all of the films can reach audiences as local content. But also to highlight that one of the things I get very frustrated about as the Commonwealth is we don't share our themes of common humanity. And I was talking about Lisa's film in Tonga recently, and somebody said, "Oh, Auntie, no, you don't have to explain it to me. I understand." Because this happens all over the Pacific. So I think we just need to work out how we can carry on funding and building and allowing all of you as filmmakers to grow. And we're doing a big project in the Pacific at the moment. We're training narrative filmmakers, and we want to carry on that work and seeing. Sometimes it's hard to carry on, and when you see this on screen, I can't thank you all enough. So really well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for that science. No, it's great. And any more, and then we'll just have a couple more, and then you'll.
Thank you, and many congratulations to all of you. I teach film. I am a filmmaker myself, and I'm very interested in understanding the process by which all of you became involved in this. And I think part of the answer came from the head of the broadcasting for the Commonwealth. I'm just curious to know whether the subcontinent of India, Bangladesh and Pakistan were included in this, because we certainly would want to in the future. I teach film. I have extremely sophisticated film students who are producing brilliant work, and we'd like to showcase it and also connect at the level of the kinds of shared experiences, particularly, I mean, I could connect with all 5 stories, but the one that I didn't imagine I would connect with was the one from Canada, from Tirana.
Tirana.
Because we have stories about the placenta. I've been working on reproductive health amongst other issues. And it's very interesting that your story brought a completely different aspect of the significance not necessarily the value, but the significance of the placenta, because in some of the cultures where I work with women, the placenta has to be buried for other reasons, not because it is being honored, but because it is evil. And it is beaten. The ground where it is buried is then beaten every time that the mother or the child get ill.
Wow.
Because the placenta is basically the cause of the illness. So it has to be tamed, and it has to, so it's treated like a living
Very
thing.
interesting.
And I'd want to explore. I mean, this would be a wonderful project.
Maybe there's a series to be done about the placenta. But and I mean very seriously, the question you asked at the beginning about all the countries of the Commonwealth, and Lucy, Hannah might be able to say something very quickly. The submissions were open to the whole Commonwealth, and there were hundreds and hundreds of submissions. In fact, these are the five finalists.
Yeah, just briefly, we had more than 600 submissions, and we developed 9 films. We made 5. 2 of the films we developed were from Pakistan. One was a transgender writer-director, and one was about blasphemy in very short language. There are many reasons why we didn't go through to the end production, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow, so I'll be able to tell you why. But the filmmakers are still in touch. And
do you have this process ongoing?
Not at the moment. We're developing phase 2 of Commonwealth Shorts at the moment.
And you can see it works. So
it will be very different.
Sorry.
Why? No, with respect.
It'll be very different.
Is there one final? There's a lady at the back there. Is there a microphone for the lady up there? And then we'll finish. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed every single film. Less because they're of universality, but more about the difference. And I guess the one thing I did think about all of them, though, was how much, or was the question really to all of you, about how far the constraint of the length influenced, or you felt it was a constraint. In a sense, what's running through my mind is, could these have been longer? Would you have wanted them to be longer? And maybe just 1 or 2 responses to that would be really helpful.
Thank you. I mean, these are Commonwealth shorts, so as you, obviously the brief was to keep them short, but I agree. I mean, some of them you could just feel a whole feature film coming on. Kareem, did you, in a way, I can't imagine that as a feature, because it was self-contained as a short, wasn't it? What did you feel about that?
I'm developing a feature based on the short.
Are you? Right.
Yeah, and so the short, the people in the short are minor characters. So I'm developing a feature about the smuggler and what got him to that point.
So there'll be more stories. And
yeah. So it's a different, but that scene is in my feature. Yeah.
And I just also got commissioned to write another film on the same topic. So.
Gosh.
And it'll be a
Kenya,
feature.
set in Kenya.
Yeah, but my producer is British, so it's gonna be international. Well, obviously, but yeah.
Right. And how do you feel? I mean,
well, Auntie is meant to be a feature length, so I used the opportunity to sort of just explore the theme. Yeah, but my first script I think was 8 pages, and I was forced to add 8 more. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. So I probably would have wanted to go shorter. So yeah.
So, and Oscar, how did you feel constrained by the brief?
I really liked that it only had to be like 12 minutes, because I don't know, I think when you're storytelling, if you can tell something in 12 minutes or even 3 minutes, it's really good for you, just using pictures. But yeah, I'm developing a feature about the big brother who's in jail, and so I'd set that in central Auckland in the mid-70s. So like these guys, it's kind of using this short film format to develop ideas and see if you can carry them on into a bigger length.
And Jules, how about you? How are you? What are you doing now? Are you making longer films, or are you working multimedia anyway?
Right. Well, just to go back to the question, what I was hoping to do, what you might be interested in, I don't know, or other countries might be interested in, is I wanted to do a non-linear format in terms of storytelling, like the National Film Board of Canada is going that direction. So an interactive website where you have a map of the world, and you can click on a country or a village, and then you can find out what that placenta story is through audio, video, storytelling, and doing it in a non-linear manner. So it's more indigenous and more feminine or woman-centered. So I don't know. I'm thinking that placenta has a longer life and a richer life, that we can explore that commonality in all of those stories, right? So I think that's really, really important and empowering. What I'm doing now is, actually, this is really cool. In Canada, women and children represent 3 to 4% of the population of Canada, women. And as Indigenous women, we represent 34% of the prison population. So my next film is called Red Bars. So I'm exploring why most of our Indigenous women are in prison. So I kind of like to do films that speak to issues that nobody wants to talk about. I'll talk about them.
Talk about.
I'll talk about. About. I'll talk about.
Talk about it.
You can talk about it or outside.
Holy man, everybody's making fun of my accent.
The rain in Spain falls maybe. But
Actually, it's the Northern Hills in Spain, just FYI. It's true.
I want to thank you all very, very much for coming and for the films. And I want to thank Oscar Kightley, Kareem Mortimer, Jules Koostachin, Wanjiru Kairu,